Welcome to the sixth and final episode of Modern Chess Masterpieces. We are going to see the famous game between Navarra and Wojtaszek from BL 2015. I'm pretty sure most of you have seen this game, but you're going to see some extraordinary variation with me. Let's get started. It started with Nadov opening, which is Wojtaszek's more commonly known as Radek, his pet variation. In fact, both David and Radek, I have worked with both of them personally. Both of them are my good friend, and the kind of game they created in this particular match is phenomenal. So yeah, we get to a very standard theory, and at this point the move g4 was played. Theoretically speaking, this line is not doing spectacularly for white, but David found a brilliant idea. I think even brilliant is an understatement at this point. We will see that soon. The theory goes with d5, which happened in the game. So after mass exchange, bishop to g2, we are attacking on d5. So knight e3 is the most standard move. Takes, and f into e3. It feels like how the game can be spectacular here. It looks like some sort of a boring endgame. But okay, for now we are attacking here, and probably the most natural move is bishop h4 check, which is what happened in the game. White plays king f1, and now knight c6. Knight c5, and here the only game that happened in a over-the-board tournament was castle. And after taking on c6, white was slightly better with his knights, having good squares on c5, e4, and with all these pawn weaknesses. However, the novelty is bishop c4, but I don't think we can count this bishop c4 move as a novelty, particularly at this level, because not only it is the top choice of computer, but it has also been played in correspondence games. So there is no doubt that both players knew this move existed. So king g1, long castle. At first sight, white's position looks so ugly. I mean, the king is on g1, black has double bishops. But there are certain tricks here. First of all, after b3, the bishop has no square. Definitely do not want to get to e6 and sacrifice itself. Once again, black knew what the move that had to be played is bishop g5. Also, theoretically, this is the reason why this entire line is not working. Black threatens to take on e3. So rook e1 was played, bishop h4. And at this point, computer says everything is repetition. Rook b1, part of preparation. The rook is better placed on b1 than on a1. Why? We will see that later. A, there is getting away from this diagonal. B, after taking on c4, the b file gets open. But anyway, bishop g5 check. Bishop g5 threatening bishop e3 check. So king f2, once again giving this check. This is important because if rook d2 check, it might look tempting, but after king g3, the bishop is under attack, and let's say rook c2, we take on c6 first, we take on c4, we take on a6, and rook b8 is happening. So after rook takes e3, just king to f2, white keeps some sort of an advantage. So king f2, bishop h4 check was played, king f3. This was the inception of the big idea that David had in mind. White avoids the draw for now. If a move like rook d2 happens, then knight to e4. We control the f2 square, we attack here, and we also attack on c4. Radek goes for e4, the most principal way to continue the game. I don't know how to say about the following move that happened in the game. From a computer point of view, white should have taken the pawn in either way. For example, to take on e4, black is forced to give a check, king f4, knight g6, and this is a draw. And that's how the game would have ended. The fact that king f4 was played and it was still part of David's preparation, it's only because back then engines were not so strong, and also David was using his local computer, local engine, which did not show that black is completely winning here. The entire chess community is thankful to David's laptop and back then his weak engine, which did not show that white is losing, because if he knew before the game that king f4 loses, which his computer is not finding, he would never get into this position, and then the entire chess community would have missed this gem. How exactly it is losing? If you put in modern engine immediately screams minus 2.5. So in the game g5 was played, which is very natural. If rook d2, then we take. I'm pretty sure Radek would have considered rook d2, and after knight e4 he would have left it. If you want to do a tactics training, At this point, I suggest pause it for 15 minutes or 20 minutes and try to figure out black's best move. I'm just giving the variation because it's insane and at the same time extremely pretty. So it would be very natural at this point to check rook takes g2, and after b takes c4, it does feel white is winning. The only move that saves black is to play f5. Would have never occurred to my mind. The point is, okay, knight d2 is the main move, but if g into f5, now we play g5. F into g6, we get this check. And then it gets clear after king g4, we take here, king takes h4, we give some sort of, we create some kind of mating attack. However, after f5, there is knight into d2, now g5. So the point of f5 is to play g5 so that king on f5 will not have a shelter because we have sacrificed the pawn on f7. So king into f5, rook f8 check, and check again. And now white must make a draw with king f5, and white cannot play king f3 because knight d4 check, bishop e2 would be mate. However, rook d2 is a bit inhuman. David also analyzed the move rook d6, and it goes like knight e4, g5, king f5, king goes to enemy camp, and after rook g8, we take, the king goes to f7, knight check, king goes further in, and apparently this is a draw, which was part of his home preparation. But such things do not happen in game, yeah? Your king do not get to e8. Well, in case if you have not seen the game before, then you are wrong, and if you have seen the game before, you know what actually happened in the game. g5 check, king f4 was played, rook he8, all part of preparation. Rook hd1 was also in David's preparation. Now, at this point, if you turn on the engine, it says -4 for black. So what happened? Why this move was missed by David's local engine back in 2015? If you want the tactics training, set the position on the board, take 30 or 40 minutes and try to figure out. This will be beautiful exercise. Or play a training games with someone. Have half an hour or 45 minutes each. I am saying that at this point black is completely winning, but it's not easy at all. The move is bishop d3. This was pointed out later by annotators. One of the primary benefit is white will not be able to take b takes c4, which keeps the b file closed. However, the path is extremely difficult. So c takes d3, there is nothing to be done. Knight e7 check. It feels wrong to give check this way because the king might escape. If king into e4, that is fairly trivial to calculate, that we start collecting materials and the king is exposed. But why not to play king f6? When knight e7 check happened, why not to play king f6? There is just no way to mate because if rook d6, I have king into f7. It turns out the only move is knight g8. Now imagine this, the move bishop d3, and then to go knight e7 check, then to go knight g8 check, king g7, and it doesn't end here. Suddenly this bishop joins the attack to give mate to the king on g7, bishop to g3. Why did we play bishop to g3? Because if we would play f5, try to create rook e7 check, white has only one resource, another tactics training. How do you stop rook e7? The only way to stop rook e7 is to play knight d5. How does it stop? Rook into d5. Now we take d into e4, and the point is the rook is not on d8. So after rook e7, we can take on g8, and this rook is controlled by the rook on d1. So what is the point of playing bishop g3? Bishop g3, we threaten only when you play d4, then black goes f5. Rook e7 check, and after knight d5, rook d5, the move d into e4 is missing. So after bishop g3, white goes king into h7. Black continues the hunt, knight e7. We want to still checkmate. If now d4, just to show the threat, check, check, and if king f7, rook h7 and rook g6 is mate, and after king g6, king d8. This is one of my favorite variation also from black's point of view. Now how black mates white is spectacular. King d8, threatening this check, knight b7, king e8, knight d6, king f8. It's so pretty. Knight into f7 and rook g6 mate. Instead of d4, white could play king g7, but now bishop e5 check. It still goes on, black still must find the only move, knight c6. Now we can see why David's computer did not see this, because even from a distance, if you don't see knight c6, black is not winning anymore. So king g6, the hunt continues. in a positional manner. Rook f8, cutting off the king, threatening some sort of knight e7, rook f6. Knight e7 is actually mate. So for example, king takes d5, once again cutting the king, and finally this turns out to be mate. None of this happened. Bishop d3 was not played, which is understandable. Rook e5, a far more natural move, which was played by Radek, and this was also the main move that David analyzed in his home preparation. King to f6, rook g8, and in fact David later told me personally, and also I think he said this in press, that he was playing very fast because he didn't want to get accused of cheating. So he was playing extremely fast, showing that it is his preparation and also giving psychological pressure. So Radek knew that David had everything under control. And of course, David could play fast because he genuinely believed that there was no mate, because his computer did not show bishop d3 move. Anyway, rook g6 check happened, king f7, everything part of preparation. At this point, the only move would be to play rook e g7, and after knight e6, this turns out to be some kind of a draw. And black keeps equality. But in the game, rook f6 check happened, king g8, rook g6, king h8. And there was this famous cartoon somewhere I saw that they drew an image where the white king on h8 was an image of a very old man and saying to the player that you better win this game, boy, because he's an old man. He walked all the way to h8, and now white should win this game. So there is no way to give checkmate. Previous idea of bishop g3, bishop d5 will not work because white has rook d5 controlling. And if rook e g7 trying to give some kind of mate, there are multiple ways. We can just take rook into b7 and take control over the g7 square. So king on h8 is actually safe. Rook f6 happened in the game. And David knew what he is doing. So rook f1. So bishop f2. And now rook into f2. It's very important because let's say if we play knight e6, trying to create some mess. But after this, black creates a huge counterplay. So rook into f2 takes rook f1. Now this is the way white escaped from getting mated, and now the king is actually very strong. Its endgame is approaching and it will start collecting pawns. Rook g2 happened in the game. It was better to play first rook e8 check and then rook g2. Although after knight e4, practically it is so much easier to play from white side. So rook into g2, white is totally winning. Rook f8 check, king c7. And here David stumbled. He played the move knight d5, which is natural. But knight taking on e4 is far more strong, keeping this threat alive and starting to collect all the pawns. King d7, knight f6 check, knight cd5. Black is getting dominated at this point. And look at this king. It's ironic that this king actually takes the rook. So knight d5 happened in the game. King d6, knight e7. Which knight to take? What is your intuition here? Well, of course, king c5. It's time for black to activate his own king. So rook f5, king into c4. After this knight d5 move, black escaped. Now the position is equal. And now we get to a very interesting rook pawn endgame. Rook takes g5. Something strange happened. There are many ways to play. Obviously, both players were tired, calculating insurmountable variations. It was possible to play rook c2 and king h7 and then king d3. Computer says 0.00, essentially it fizzles out. Radek played rook g3, which is also natural. You want to take the pawn, and e4 pawn is further from its initial square, so that's the reason you want to take the e3 pawn quickly. h4, and the first blunder happened in the rook pawn endgame. At this point, the drawing variation is also very pretty, and it is almost like a study. Black could take rook into e3, takes. Only move, he has to move the rook, and it is very important to put the rook on g3, which ties down the g5 rook due to the g4 pawn. h5, e3, pawn race begins, king g6. We actually had to play king c3 because after e2, now there is rook e5. When we are missing king, we cannot get king d3. So that's the reason we have to play king c3, king g6, e2, h7, queen, and king into c2. Look at this. In the same game, white king went to h8 to find his safe zone. Black king had to come to a1 to get his safe zone. How many games have you seen like this? For me, this is the only game I have seen something like this happening. There has been many king walks, but this one is at completely different level. Particularly when we start to analyze. I mean, this one thing is to see the game, but going through these pretty lines. So anyway, you can only imagine how difficult it must be to calculate this from a distance. So h6 was played. This is a blunder. Rook g6, rook into e3. A very important tactical and strategic moment. Pause the video for 15 minutes or 10 minutes and figure out how to play. Do you want to take this pawn? Do you want to take this pawn? Do you want to push your pawns? What do you want to do? David played the strongest move. There are two moves that wins. It is very important that king has to come back. Our king is, the job is done. King went there from e1 all the way to h7 and now it must come back. So both king h7 and king g7 wins. In the game king g7 was played. Rook g3, king h6, e3. And here a bit counterintuitive move. David brought back the king, but the win was actually with g5 first. Because still there is no e2, we have rook e6. And this time king c3 runs into rook takes c6 check. The best move would have been rook g4, h5, we push the pawn. Rook e4 trying to push the pawn. And rook comes back from here. And there is no way to stop this pawn. So the variation can go something like, let's say g6, king e6. Again, only one move. It's a good tactics training as well. We want to play this here or here. Only one move wins, and that's king h7. Because it's very important to keep the pawn here to stop king f7. And to play king g7 would be a huge blunder, because after rook g1 h6, black goes for the g6 pawn. That's why we start with king h7. This pawn is controlling the king. And now after rook g1, only now we play g7, king f7, we go h6. And now we are in time to play king h8 and h7. So yeah, if we would start here with first g7, then after king h7, king f7, king h7, black is not obliged to play rook g1, but he has the move rook e8. So that's the difference. In the game, David played king g5. Another chance was missed. Radek played king d5, trying to stop rook e6 ideas. The move was king c3 and king to d2. And it turns out black is just on time to create enough counterplay. White will have two pawns, in fact 3 pawns, but this is not enough because black rook is, first of all, it was stopping these 2 pawns, and when we distract the rook and try to push this pawn, there are enough amount of checks available to make a draw, and otherwise we are just in time. King d5, but it is almost impossible to calculate all the lines because it is not at all easy. Here white could play rook g8, getting this square, and after king e4 we start pushing the pawn. And this time after queening, the king on g5 is once again safe thanks to the rook on e3. Black is missing any kind of checks and the king on e4 is exposed. King f4 happened in the game, and the final error, the last chance to save the game, was e2. So we need rook e6, so that's why c4 check takes. If rook c6, we don't know what Radek means, but it could be something around this point, when the only move would be to play rook a3, h5, and then the king comes back, and this is a draw. But after c4 here, rook e6, rook h3, this also turns out to be holding for black. But in the game, rook h3 was played, and now after h5, probably this was missed, that after e2 there is simple rook g5, king d4, and this pawn is stopped. The king cannot come so easily, and we are pushing the pawns. Let's say if white goes like black goes king to c3, most likely this was missed, that there is the move king g3, and we pick up the pawn on e2. So h5 c5 happened, rook g5 check, rook came to the file on e file controlling this e pawn, rook h2, rook e3, there is no rook f2 because of rook f3, and after rook c2, rook h3, Radek resigned at this point. I hope you enjoyed this game as much as I enjoyed showing this. The variations are very complicated. It is it's a very good game for training purpose, and I would really advise you to go through the video one more time at your own pace, do it slowly, or simply get the board, set the position and start analyzing over the board without engine. This will be a very good exercise for calculation training, and ideally you should do this after 2-3 weeks, so that when you forget everything about what I said right now, then get the game and do it, do analysis on your own. Alright guys, that will be end of this particular series. I hope all of you enjoy it, learn something new. There are so many games that could have been included. It's very difficult to make the choices. I tried to find some interesting, instructive games, which I believe all of you enjoyed. See you soon in some other series. Bye bye.